USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Sunday, December 30th, 2018. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo, New York. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Jim, on our Game of the Week podcast, we talked to Chris Peters from ESPN about the World Juniors Tournament. And 3 games in the books for the USA, some mixed results, but why don't we hop right in? Started out for the U.S. with a 2-1 win over Slovakia. It sort of felt like the U.S. should have had a little bit more dominant score in that one.
Well, that's a team that has given the U.S. a little bit of a fit in the last couple of years. It's been a very difficult opponent. And as you might have heard many people say throughout the years of this tournament, I've heard it a lot the last week, that first game can be so difficult to get going. You know, you've got some new guys in there that haven't played in the event before. You've got the anticipation. You've got some nerves that factor in. And the U.S. at times looked very dominant in that game, but they were struggling to score goals. They found a way to win, though, and that's usually what it comes down to, a power play goal in the third period to tie the game at 1, and then they get a game winner a little bit later on and then hold on. That was one of those games that you take your deep breath, you say, we got the 3 points. You needed those 3 points to kind of start yourself off on the right foot. It was a good start for this team. Yes, everybody would love that game. You know, Canada won that same opener 14-0 over Denmark. So, yeah, you'd rather have 14-0 than 2-1, but I think that 2-1 also maybe prepares your team a little bit more to battle in those moments of adversity in this tournament.
Well, the U.S. sailed to an 8-2 win over Kazakhstan in the second game.
And that was kind of expected. You know, Kazakhstan, their first year out of relegation into, promoted up to the main tournament. And, U.S. looked pretty good right off the jump. They scored early. Gave up a quick goal right back to Kazakhstan, which, this tournament is being played in Canada, and there's no, every game is a road game basically up there because every Canadian fan roots against the Americans. So the building got into it. And now you're saying, oh boy, here we go. You're in a 1-1 game against Kazakhstan. And then Joel Farabee took over and scored 3 goals in a span of about 6.5 minutes, a 4-1 lead. They expanded it up to 8-1 through 2 periods. And then you could see that, there was going to be a deceleration, taking your foot off the gas pedal a little bit. And I think that was probably the proper thing to do. You don't need to run up scores. I know Canada loves to do it in this tournament just to prove how dominant they are. But the Americans, I think they take a better approach. They rested some guys, got some guys ice time from some of the lower lines that didn't skate as much. I thought it was a really well-managed game, an 8-2 win.
Well, then that brings us to the game against Sweden. The U.S. spotting Sweden a 4-0 lead before battling back. Your thoughts on that one?
That was, if anybody hasn't watched that game, find a way to get it on NHL Network. I'm sure they'll re-show it. It was an instant classic. When you think of how bad things were going for the better part of 2+ periods for the U.S., and they couldn't do anything right. Their power play didn't look effective. Then all of a sudden you're down 4-0. You pick up a power play goal. Your captain, Mikey Anderson, scores, gets that power play goal, and then you get another penalty. I think it was less than 2 minutes later on the Swedes. You're back to the power play. And Ryan Poehling, we know how great he has been at the college game. He was filling in for Jack Hughes, who I believe is still kind of battling a bit of an injury. He takes his place on his line and scores on the power play. Then you pull the goalie, and there's under a minute left, and Poehling scores twice more in 13 seconds, ties the game, sends it to overtime. Unfortunately, I didn't think the U.S. looked like they were ready for 3-on-3 overtime. They did control the puck a lot, but they didn't get the chances that they needed to. And then, again, if you don't know how to play 3-on-3, you make some mistakes, and they made a critical danger zone turnover right at the offensive blue line, led to a 2-on-1 back, and Sweden had some really pretty passing to finish it off, win the game in overtime, extended their preliminary round win streak to 47 games, dating back almost 12 complete years without a loss in the preliminary round of this tournament. But I think if you're the USA, you walk out of that game saying we can hold our heads high. We show character in this game. We show that we're a pretty good team. We don't want to fall behind, but we know that if we do, it's not over. Those are some of the characteristics that in a really quick tournament like this, you love to see, because you might be in a semifinal or a quarterfinal or even a medal game, and you go down and you know that it's not the end because you have the horses, you have the firepower. They found that way to get a point. Now they have 7 points in the standing. They're in back of Sweden, who has 8. They finish off this tournament preliminary round, at least, on New Year's Eve against a very tough Finnish team. And you hope that you can get into that number 2 spot. If you could jump up to number 1 for some reason, that would be wonderful. But I don't see the Swedes faltering in this preliminary round.
Before we get on to talk about that 3-on-3 overtime, which I know we want to get into, any other players you want to highlight? I mean, one who people are talking about after a really slow start this season at BC, after being cut from the team last year, Oliver Wahlstrom is having a pretty good tournament.
He looks really comfortable. And we've seen this in the past. This is something that has happened many times over the years, where kids go into college as freshmen, as 17 or 18-year-old freshmen, and they struggle their first half of the season. Then they go to World Juniors and they shine on an international stage. They're playing with all the same players their age, as opposed to maybe playing against some 23 or 24-year-old seniors. And suddenly these players break out of a shell and they come back, and in the second half of the season, they're a different player. I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head. It's not coming, but those are the situations that exist, and they're really positive for the players and the teams they return to. And I really like the way that Wahlstrom has played. I thought actually the first game he looked a little bit pedestrian, then he broke out. And then last night, I really thought he looked his role. He knew what he was supposed to do. He was able to set up a couple of those third period goals and make some really good plays, force a turnover on one of those goals. I think that this could be one of those situations where Wahlstrom goes back to Chestnut Hill after the break, and he's a much more effective player. Now, I caveat that by saying he has to be given the opportunity. BC's got enough players in their lineup that they don't have to depend on Wahlstrom. But, if he gets that opportunity, I bet he's a little bit of a different player. Maybe he has a little bit more swagger in the second half.
How about goaltending? The save percentage between the two is not that great. Your thoughts on that? Yeah,
the one I'm most familiar with is Caden Primo from Northeastern. He only got a shot against Kazakhstan. Didn't really see many shots to start, and that's a big part of it. So you're not seeing a lot of shots, and maybe didn't have exactly the game he wanted. But when called on, he got the opportunity, and he at times could play pretty well. Now it will kind of rest on the shoulders. I don't think we'll see Primo again. That's kind of one of those realities when you get into this type of a tournament. Coaches really like to ride that hot hand as much as they possibly can, and it's not always exactly what you want to do. But Kyle Kaiser, who's a player with the Oshawa Generals, seems to be the guy he wants to ride here. That he being Mike Hastings, the head coach, and I think he's performed well. I thought there were a couple of goals maybe he'd like to have back throughout this tournament, but goaltending is a big part of the World Junior Tournament, and there's no doubt about that. Canada has had a little bit of their own internal controversy over who the goaltender should be, and is this guy good enough? And listen, you need the confidence in your goaltender in a tournament like this. A goaltender in a tournament like this can win the tournament himself. We've seen that in the past with some of Team USA's medals. So, I think that they have a good amount of confidence in Kyle Kaiser. He made a couple of saves despite giving up 4 goals and falling behind 4-0 last night. He was playing good hockey. That's a very good Swedish team, maybe one of the top 4 teams in this tournament, maybe one of the top 2 teams in this tournament. So I think that is an interesting area to watch, but I do believe that Kaiser will be the guy that Mike Hastings and his staff rides to the end.
Well, he'll have his opportunity against a Finnish team that's been piling up some goals. Strange not to have USA and Canada on New Year's Eve, but they're in separate brackets. The Canadians will be taking on the Russians with the final game of the first round.
there's a part of me that misses Canada, and there's a part of me that is glad that they're not going to face them. The reality is now, depending on how things shake out, it does look like, I believe, tomorrow night's game for Canada, when I say tomorrow, I actually mean, Monday night, the New Year's Eve game with Russia, I think should determine who gets the number one seed in the bracket. I didn't look at, right before we got on, I didn't look at all the results today, and I know there's still a late game tonight to be played. But, if Canada doesn't get that one seed, U.S. doesn't look like they're going to be in a position to get that one seed, then it has to see it. Does one of those teams drop to 3 and you end up with getting 2 versus 3 playing in that first round, that quarterfinal round before you even get to the medal round? So that would be interesting if one of those teams could be out before the medal round because they face each other in the quarterfinals.
Well, we brought this up at the beginning of the season on probably this weekend review podcast, probably one of our first episodes, talking about 3-on-3 overtime and some of this stuff that went on during the summer with the rules committee, talking about, first saying, you only have 5 minutes of 5-on-5 and that's it. And then the NCHC Big Ten and WCHA all campaigning for the ability to have 3-on-3, which they get to have after the 5-on-5, but it counts as a tie for NCAA purposes. And it was sort of the Western leagues versus the Eastern leagues. And, some of the arguments made during the summer and leading up to that and after the decision was changed, made by NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton, really pushed me in the direction of being in favor of it. Now, you got to rethink that a bit after watching the 3-on-3 last night. Why don't we kick into that discussion, 3 versus 3 overtime?
Yeah, I've always said that 3-on-3 is an entertaining brand of hockey. When this year it looked like the commissioners were leaning toward just going 5-on-5 across the board, I kind of put myself in a position of saying, you know what, it's worked for enough years. Let's keep going with it. And then now we've broken it back up to it's 5-on-5 for some overtime. Some leagues start at 4-on-4. Then the 3-on-3. It's to me, I've now come to my conclusion, and I think it would be very difficult to move me off of this at this point. The NCAA, all 6 conferences, every game, non-conference, conference, doesn't matter. It is time to mimic what is done everywhere else, which is you play 60 minutes of hockey. If you're tied, you play 5 minutes of 3-on-3 overtime, and then you go to a shootout. That is what is done. It is the skills that these players need to learn if they're going to play in the East Coast League, the American Hockey League, if they're going to play in the NHL, if they're going to play in Olympic tournaments, if they're going to play in world tournaments, whatever it is. These are now the standards. The NCAA is really the only place, once you get to that level of either college, major, junior, and everything above it, the NCAA is the only level that does not really use the same format as everybody else. What you are depriving these kids of is the skill development. And these are skills that are going to be needed at the pro level. And you could see it on Saturday night, Sunday morning, by the time this happened. But you get to overtime, and the U.S. didn't have players that were overly familiar with how to play a 3-on-3, and the fact that it's not all about, you're not trying to establish zone time. You're never trying to do anything like that. You're just trying to play keep away and find the area where you're going to isolate a 2-on-1 or a 2-on-0 or a 1-on-0 and get, into the best scoring position on the ice. They got kind of rope-a-doped, I thought, a little bit by Sweden because of that lack of skill. And Sweden was letting them, come on, let's attack. We're going to wait for you to screw up because you don't know what you're doing. Turn the puck over, and we're going the other way. A danger zone turnover right at the offensive blue line, and now Sweden was off to the races. They bury the goal, and they end up with the 5-4 win. That was a win the U.S., I thought, really could have used. That you take a win out when you are losing with 10 minutes to go in regulation. I know they'll have a little moral victory of just getting a point out of that because there wasn't a point there to get. But if you get 2 points out of that, two of the 3 points out of that, boy, does that just change the way you can look at that game. And I just think that we have, by trying to have hodgepodge rules, inconsistent rules throughout the entirety of college hockey, is punishing the development of these players. And I know you're here for the reason, you're here for now. It's about what's going on now. coaches are really nervous about, boy, we sometimes play great games in regulation, and after 60 minutes, you don't want to see it decided by 3-on-3 because that's not what hockey is. Well, listen, that is what hockey is everywhere else. The East Coast League, the AHL, the NHL, the IHF, World Championships, Olympic Games. That is what it's going to be. If this was year 2 of this or year 3, fine. I get it. You don't want to adapt, but I didn't even look it up before we got on the air. But if this feels like it's been 10 to 15 years that we've been playing 3-on-3 overtime in the NHL, it's been a long time. It's going nowhere. It works. So you've got to finally adapt and stop being. There's sometimes just not enough forward-looking thought to say that we need to change.
Okay, well, a few points on that, and I'm in agreement with you. And I used to feel against the 3-on-3, but one good thing about the 3-on-3, it does increase the opportunity to score, and it's still a team game, unlike the shootout. I don't really like shootouts deciding anything except maybe a point in standings. And I'll grudgingly say, okay, if you want to do that in your league, fine. You touched on one thing that I think is important to look at: points. Let's go to 3 points. Let's give 1 point if you make it to overtime and 2 points for the overtime winner. That makes a little more skin in the game, and it makes a balanced amount of points. Another point on this is different leagues at different times have done things to innovate. College hockey used to have the no-touch icing and then went to the hybrid icing. And the NHL looked at that and said, hey, that picks up a lot on safety. Let's look at doing that. There may be some stuff college doesn't want to do, like the full shield or the face mask. I mean, if they had that in the NHL, Ryan Donato would have 4 more teeth right now. But, that's not going to change. I'm happy to have college hockey stick with the full shield. But there's some other things to look at. Delay of game with the puck getting shot over the glass like the NHL does. Maybe that's something college hockey would like to do or like to consider to give some power play opportunities, some scoring opportunities. I know that there are some arenas maybe with low glass that might inhibit that, might mean 5 penalties a game for that. Maybe we don't want to go that direction.
Or you just spend some money on glass. Spend money on glass.
Well, there you go.
It's not that hard.
Well, you know what? You're going to visit an arena. I know you're planning to see the games at Mercyhurst coming up for Mike Fogel. And they have an interesting situation where they have low glass on one side and high glass on the side where the fans are. So you can play the puck high off the glass on one side. The other side, you try to do that, you're going to throw it in the bench or down the hallway there or something. So, but that's something to consider. And something else we should look at in the NHL is how they're officiating the flow of the game. College hockey is inconsistent, and that's a nice word. There are some times where the emphasis on trying to get more flow in the game has gone by the wayside, and the emphasis this year on stick penalties is being forgotten. I'm just going to throw that in there on the side, but it's time to consider continuing to innovate. And I know I'm probably going to get in trouble with some leagues on this, but we have leagues that are working on innovation, not just on the ice, but in digital, in social media, in fan experience, in marketing, that are doing some things that are moving them ahead. Those are the ones that are looking at the 3-on-3. And the leagues that are starting to fall behind in that department are the ones that are kind of stuck in the past. I think it's time to look forward. Now, I have not always been somebody in favor of rule changes. I still kind of grouse a little bit about the designated hitter. And I think the idea that minor league baseball puts a guy on second base in the 10th inning is just insane. But, rules change over the years as players change. Look at basketball. You don't have a 6-foot foul lane anymore. You have a 10-foot one. You had 12 feet in the NBA. They added the 3-point line after the ABA started that. Everybody has that now. The things have changed over the years as players have changed, as skills have changed. And you know what? It's time for the NCAA to move ahead on that. And one other innovation, I'll give a hats off on this one. North Dakota had an exhibition game against the U.S. Under-18 National Development Team. They busted out the old Sioux jerseys because it wasn't an NCAA game, so they could do that. Props to them if you're happy about that. But they used a mic on the refs. That is great. Some games I see, you don't even know what the call is. I've seen games where the scorer's table has to call the referee back over because he hasn't given a signal. Now, if we have explanations on calls, if we have explanations on no goal, if we have explanations from the referee after looking at video, that can only enhance the game, enhance fans' understanding of it, and maybe give better appreciation for officiating. So, yeah. 3-on-3, tip of the iceberg on things that could improve.
Yeah, and it goes to an argument that I made back to a guy that might be a forgotten guy, and he ended up losing his life in college hockey rather quickly. But Paul Kelly, the old Players Union rep from the NHL, he started College Hockey Inc. People kind of forget that. Now it's Mike Snee and Nate Ewell, they do a fantastic job, but Paul Kelly believed at one point there was no need. You could have 6 conferences and you could have, 6 championships and all that sort of stuff. But he believed that everybody should kind of be under one umbrella. At college hockey, it's so small. It's not like college football where you have, I don't even know, 40 plus conferences. I mean, you have your 5 majors, you have a couple of mid majors, you have a couple of mid majors, the Ivy League, whatever. This is not like football or basketball where there's conferences abound. This is 6 conferences that somehow seemingly can't figure out how to play the game consistently because you all have different rules on how you handle your standings, your scoring. And I get it. One conference wants to feel so innovative and the other ones feel like they're being pushed around. But you know what? We should be guiding ourselves toward what is beneficial to the player. And when it comes, and I'm trying to stay laser focused on 3-on-3 overtime. When it comes to that, the players benefit by learning that skill before they get to the next level. Every skill that you want in the NHL, you should be able to get in college. And if you're in Hockey East, the ECAC, or Atlantic Hockey, you are spending likely 0 hours a year on 3-on-3 overtime and 3-on-3 play. Whereas I talked to a couple of people in the NHL today just asking how much time spent. They said usually the last 15, 20 minutes of at least a couple of practices a week are spent entirely on 3-on-3 overtime. So these kids or these players, student athletes, are not getting that skill at a lot of these schools. We're now talking about half of the schools, more than half of the schools. I think that's a little bit of a shame. That's where we've got to take the egos out and put in the ability to work together and just do what's right for the game. Maybe some fans don't like it. No, not every fan thought it was going to work in the NHL, but boy, does it work in the NHL, and boy, do fans love it. And is there an electric feeling? Yes. Have players, goaltenders even, have begun to accept it as a win or a loss. It happens. Yes, You got to overtime, and it wasn't exactly how you played the game for 100 years prior, but guess what? It's a win and it's a loss, and you feel it. And you've got to just get this whole notion of, we've got to be able to get a good tie out of this every now and again. That's baloney. I'm done with good ties. It's time to teach our kids how to play the game the way they need to play at the next level. Again, listen, you and I are both
old enough to remember the 2-line pass being prohibited in the NHL. Sure. And it used to be a 1-line pass was prohibited. The league, the game changes. I'm with you. It's time to do it. And as College Hockey Inc. is out there pushing college hockey as a great and probably the best path to the NHL, and as there is the hashtag on social media, 51 and 30, looking for 51% college players by 2030 in the NHL, this is just one step forward. And I think it would help the fan experience. Jim, I think we've covered this one pretty well, and it's time for us to take a quick break to let our friends from the NCAA mention about this year's Frozen Four at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot. Morris takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Welcome back to USCHO's Weekend Review Podcast. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly, and it was fun talking about the 3-on-3, but we do have some college hockey to hit on quickly before we wrap up with this episode. First of all, the Desert Classic hosted by Arizona State, and coming out with the really cool Cactus Trophy was Clarkson University. Clarkson with a 3-1 win in the championship game over Minnesota Duluth, and a 3-0 shutout of the host Arizona State the night before.
Yeah, and hats off to Casey Jones and his team. They were probably the least talked about team going into that tournament. You had your defending national champion. You had Minnesota State, which was red hot, number 3 in the country coming in. You had Arizona State, which has been just a great story this year. And then you had Clarkson, nationally ranked, put up a good first half, but who's Clarkson? Despite the fact that this has been a team that has played very good hockey for 2 seasons now, they were forgotten a little bit, and they went in and rode their goaltender and did a great job of just playing team defense, finding ways to manufacture goals. They get 3 goals a night, let up 1 goal over 2 nights, a 6-1 goal differential in the tournament, and they walk away with a trophy. And even more importantly, they had to play a championship game in the early slot yesterday. I believe it was 4:00 Mountain Time was their game. So you played in front of no fans, probably a pretty empty arena in an early slot. They did everything that can be difficult in a tournament like that. Everything that kind of mimics, some of the difficulties you sometimes see in an NCAA regional. And here they came out on top. 4 very good teams in that tournament. They walked away with the trophy.
And the tournament ends up dropping Arizona State to number 11 in the pairwise, but they are still in a pretty good position with a pretty tough schedule on the way out.
They do, and I think we mentioned it in a podcast before the break. They don't have as many games in the second half as they did in the first. They won't have playoffs to play. One thing that they did salvage last night was a tie. That was pretty important. They scored their Johnny Walker, their leading scorer, potted a late goal. At the closing seconds, I think it was about 23 seconds or so left in regulation. They get the tie. They skated through the overtime, ended up tied. They won a shootout, which got them, if there was a third place trophy, it got them a third place trophy. If not, they had third place bragging rights. They did win the shootout, but they needed a little something out of that tournament. That's all they got. Greg Powers, listening to his post game on Friday night after the 3-0 loss, just said his team, just kind of never got off break. They never looked good the entire game. I think his quote, "If we played this team 100 times and played like that 100 times, we will lose 100 times." So that's a reality. They didn't seem to have it. The team that kind of maybe concerns you a little bit, an overtime loss, on the first night, and then surrendering the late lead on the second night, Minnesota State. That was a very hot team. They had a great first half of the year. Interesting to see. There's no poll this week. There'll be one next week where they end up in the whole mix of the poll. They're still a very good team. I think we all know that, and they'll be right in the NCAA mix at the end of the year. But kind of a concerning start for their fans, maybe missing their head coach, obviously Mike Hastings, coaching the World Junior team. So there's a little bit to go around there, but you might want to just kind of keep your eye on Minnesota State in the weeks going forward.
As we're recording, they've dropped to number 13 in the pairwise, which puts them sort of on the bubble. Well, let's turn to another tournament, the Ledyard Bank Classic, and this evening it was a 5-3 win by Providence over Dartmouth to get that championship.
And that was another one of those. The Vermont Catamount Cup was the same way, where it was a predetermined pairings, so you didn't necessarily have a championship and consolation game. It happened that the 2 teams that were playing the late game on Sunday had both won on Saturday. That makes for an easier tournament. It makes for something that's more sensical to the fans. But Providence, give them credit. They came out and played a good weekend of hockey right out of the chute. I think they fell behind on the first game Saturday night, but scored 3 third period goals. This one they maybe had a little bit more control over against Dartmouth, but they find a way to win. I'm really looking forward to seeing where Providence goes in the second half of the season. They're kind of in that bubble land of NCAA pairwise rankings, and there's a lot of hockey to be played. I just know there's so much good to this team, and they had a couple of stumbles in that first half. I look for them to be a dominant team here in the second half.
Well, in the Catamount Cup, the host Vermont Catamounts were the winner of that one on a goal differential.
You know what? I love Kevin Sneddon. He's one of my favorite coaches in the game. They've never changed the format of this tournament that I can remember in recent years. They've stuck with this goal differential. 2 Hockey East teams typically go. They never play each other throughout the tournament. It's set up that way. And this time, Northeastern and Vermont both pulled off their 2 wins on the weekend. Northeastern had a harder time against RPI in the first game, needing overtime to win, and thus lost the tournament because they needed that overtime and only had a +1 out of their first night, whereas Vermont had beat Alabama Huntsville 4-1. They were +3 coming out of the first night, and it ended up being +5 for Vermont, +3 for Northeastern, and goal differential. No team wants to lose, no team wants to not win a tournament when you go in and win both of your games. You did everything you possibly could. You just didn't slaughter your opponent. Vermont, hats off. You got another Catamount Cup to put on your shelf. I guess that's a good thing. I just would rather see those 2 teams that win in the first night square off in the second night, no matter what league they play in. I like the more traditional tournaments. Use these tournaments to become tune-ups for what you do down the end of the season. Your league tournament, your NCAA regional, your Frozen Four. That's what these tournaments should be mimicking and preparing the players for.
The GLI, the first round is in the books. The second round happens tomorrow. We had a listener write to us and say, hey, what about attendance and scheduling issues now that the arena is also shared by the Detroit Pistons and the Detroit Red Wings? But it doesn't sound like attendance was too much of an issue for the first night of action.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting too, Ed. Tomorrow is New Year's Eve. That'll be the consolation and finals. The final game will not be Michigan State as people maybe expected or tend to expect in this tournament, or maybe root for. It's going to be Lake Superior against Michigan Tech, as both prevailed in either a shootout or overtime tonight. So I'll see what it is tomorrow. When we got that email earlier this week, it kind of opened my eyes, and I said, "Oh, that is a little tough when you have to now battle with 2 tenants to schedule an event like this." And they now have the Pistons used to play in Auburn Hills, I think it was, and wherever they were, and in obviously the Red Wings out at Little Caesars. So now you've got 2 tenants. You're going to have a little harder time finding dates, but overall, I don't think it'll matter. 18,000 plus was the announced attendance for tonight's games. That's pretty good. You don't see a lot of college hockey tournaments in a season putting 18,000 fans in over 2 games.
The listener also suggested, what about rotating between downtown Detroit and Van Andel Arena out in Grand Rapids? Almost 11,000 seats. Grand Rapids Griffins have that as their home ice.
Yeah, well, if you're putting in 18,000, you don't want to be going to a venue where you're going to have to lose 7,000 fans. If that number was real tonight, we're not there. I didn't see any photos or anything like that, but you tend to hope that they're announcing a somewhat real attendance, even if it's not at 16,000, 11,000. You'd be, obviously you're creating demand for tickets, but you're also creating a problem when it really comes to, you could put more fans in. You're losing revenues. I think it's a slippery slope. This tournament's been in Detroit for too long, though. That's the reality. You can't just start moving tournaments around just because you might have to worry about dates and schedules.
Well, I agree with you on that one. Before we break for the end of the episode, this extended episode of Weekend Review, we don't always have so much to rant about. Some milestones, a couple of coaching milestones. Win number 500 for Quinnipiac's Rand Pecknold, and win number 300 for Providence's Nate Leaman, 2 of the great coaches in college hockey.
Yeah, and I know both of them really well. I really enjoy both of these guys. They're cut from similar cloths in terms of how they approach their kind of transparency, and neither one of them is going to beat around the bush a lot. They're going to tell you exactly how they feel to your face. They're not these, spin doctors who kind of try to beat around the bush and
business-like.
they're very businesslike. I enjoy that about both of them. I always have, and I've known Rand a little longer than I've known Nate. But regardless, obviously Nate, 300 wins between Union and Providence. I remember when Nate was an assistant coach at Maine on the 99 national championship team with Sean Walsh. I remember his time. I believe he was at Harvard. He's seen his places around this game, and he's done a great job of developing teams. Obviously, he didn't win a national championship at Union, but after he left, they won the next year, and he had kind of set them in a good direction. Then he gets to Providence, wins a national championship. Rand Pecknold, John Butchergross, one of our good friends from ESPN, had a tweet kind of with a life story, in whatever it is, at 200 something characters, but talked about how he took over a Division II program. I think he was making, it said $7,600 $6,700 a year, built it up, was there when they transitioned to the MAC in Division I when Division II was being eliminated, stuck with it all the way, got them into Atlantic hockey. He had a great athletic director to work with in Jack McDonald. Then they transitioned to the ECAC. They had some great success very quickly in that league, putting up some good records. They were not a cellar dweller the second they went into that league. Then 4 consecutive NCAA tournaments, 2 Frozen Fours out of that, 2 national title game appearances, countless All-Americans to go through in that time. I love what he's done with that program too. The only thing he lacks compared to Nate is that national title. And sometimes you just bounces the pucks away. And I feel like that sometimes has been what it's been for both of these coaches, good bounces and bad bounces. They've had a very similar path. Obviously ran around as a head coach a little bit longer, and he's got the 200 extra wins, but both great guys. And it's ironic to see them both get it on the same night, because they really do kind of shadow each other in terms of, the business-like approach they take to the game.
$6,700 a year. We've got a couple of coaches out there in D1 making $6,700 a week. So there you have it.
Or more.
Or more. Well, some of them have retired. But anyway, Jim, we probably should wrap things up here for this edition of USCHO Weekend Review. Everybody enjoy your hockey and enjoy your new year. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of US College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.